I do firmly believe that getting yourself into that recovery state as fast as possible is how you can get into the anabolic mode as fast as possible, how you can get into recovery mode as fast as possible, and how you can signal to the brain, most importantly, that you're safe, right? Because if you're stressed out from your training and you recover quickly, your body's going to signal that the threat is done, right? The threat is done, and now we can just grow and adapt.
Right.
If you're not allowing yourself to recover and you're continuing to be stressed, you're rolling right into stressful work, or you're doing, then what is the brain supposed to do? It's going to continue to think that you're threatened, right? So it's going to dump all its resources that it can. You're going to pull from, everyday life. You're going to pull from the energy you can give your family, that you can give yourself. And it truly is a stacking disaster eventually.
Welcome back to the Smarter Not Harder podcast, your home for 1 cent solutions to $64,000 questions. I'm your host again today. My name is Dr. Scott Sherr, and it's a pleasure to be back with all of you. Today's podcast was a really fun one to record with Thomas DeLauer. Thomas has become a good friend over the last couple of years. I've been on his YouTube channel a whole bunch talking about things related to his transcriptions, health optimization medicine and practice, our nonprofit. And today I got the chance to interview him, which was super fun. So here is a bio for Thomas. So Thomas is renowned for his evidence-based approach to nutrition and fitness. Through his own 100-pound transformation, he developed a scientific, results-driven perspective that has helped him even the busiest individuals, from top athletes to special operations operators, make small, sustainable changes to their diet and lifestyle. His practical strategies for achieving peak health and performance have made him one of the most trusted health educators in the digital space. And he's a leading health and fitness expert with over 3.8 million YouTube subscribers. He specializes in weight loss and inflammation reduction protocols, and widely recognized for science-based content on metabolic optimization. And this is really true for Thomas. He's one of the guys that I really do think cuts through a lot of the noise out there and creates great, amazing videos, tons of great scientific-based content. And I really do think that he does change the game when it comes to understanding fitness from a really cool way. And so in this podcast, Thomas and I spoke about parasympathetic activation for performance. So this is the idea that you have to relax before, during, and after workouts to truly optimize your performance. Anabolic activity happens after you work out. You don't actually make your performance gains during your workout, you make them after. So Thomas and I talked about strategies on how to optimize your parasympathetic nervous system before, during, and after workout. We talked about breath work, meditation, posture, CO2 training, so carbon dioxide training. This is based on some of the work by Brian McKenzie, Oxygen Advantage, the Buteyko method, and things like that. We also spoke about supplementation as well and how this can help leverage the parasympathetic nervous system. We did this in a very holistic way. We talked about why the parasympathetic nervous system is so important for anabolic growth and for heart rate variability and for vagal tone and things like that, and how that's also important during the workout, after the workout, even before, and then how it's so important for you to recover from a sleep perspective. And Thomas and I also spoke about carbohydrates. He is a relatively low carbohydrate guy, but he did talk about how he uses them intra-workout and after workout, and as far as the timing that can be best, both pre-workout, if you're going to use it, but not necessary, but definitely intra-workout, and then post-workout, whether you do it right afterwards or you have it a couple hours later, depending on if you're on a weight loss journey versus a elite athlete, or you don't need to lose weight and maybe you can use carbs right afterwards. So if you've listened to Thomas's stuff, you know he's a fantastic educator. He does a great job in this podcast. At the end, we also talk about how he's going to be one of our speakers at the Health Optimization Medicine and Practice Symposium, October 17th and 18th in Boulder, Colorado. You can check it out at homehope.org. He's going to be one of our speakers along with many other amazing speakers. Come check it out. If you're a health enthusiast, if you're a practitioner, it's going to be a fantastic event with so many great speakers in an amazing location right close to me here in Boulder, Colorado, in the change of seasons in the fall when the leaves will be changing and it'll be beautiful. So come check it out. Without further ado, check out this amazing and far-reaching, scientifically backed podcast, Parasympathetic Activation for Performance with Thomas DeLauer. Take care. Thomas, it's good to see you, man.
Likewise, brother. Thanks, man.
Well, thank you for taking some time today. You and I have become friends over the last year or two, and it's been so much fun to be on your podcast, your YouTube, I should say, and talk about multiple topics. But I'm excited finally to get you on here to talk a little bit about parasympathetic activation in workouts. And this is something that you and I are going to be talking about pretty soon, actually, in a couple of weeks in Vegas. And I know something very dear to you. So tell me about your evolution, man. I know like it used to be like push hard all the time. And like as much as you could do, as much as in as short a period of time as possible. When did you decide, or when did you start realizing that there was something about this parasympathetic nervous system that you needed to care about?
I mean, truthfully, it really became something that was drilled a little bit more into my psyche after I met you. But prior to that, observationally, I would see it, and I wouldn't necessarily grasp what was going on, but I could see this happening. Mainly, I sort of drank the CrossFit Kool-Aid for a little while. I spoke at the CrossFit Games a few years ago, and I kind of got interested in it just because I tend to immerse myself in whatever I'm speaking engagement, or I want to be familiar with what they're doing. So I kind of got addicted to CrossFit a little bit, now barring some injuries as a result. But anyway, point is,
sure.
I got into it. I thought it was kind of fun. And in observing the top athletes, I would notice that they would always kind of in between these monumental sets of, hypothetically, let's say front squats going into a 2,000 meter row or something like that. These crazy anaerobic feats. There would be these micro pauses that I would notice that they would do. They would, finish their set. They would sometimes flop to the ground for 5 or 10 seconds and then hit the ground running and just go balls to the wall.
Wow.
And then you'd watch sort of the lower level athletes, and I mean that with respect, but the ones that weren't, maybe top 10 or so, and they would sprint and they'd try to grind to the next one, and it was just, I could observe that the ones that were winning, the ones that were doing well, maybe they didn't flop to the ground and completely rest, but they had a really good finger on the pulse of their parasympathetic tone. Like they knew how to regulate. I would even observe some of them doing breathwork practices for 5 or 10 seconds before moving on to something else. And they would take that dedicated time. And I was looking at that like, wow, you guys are in race mode. This doesn't make a lot of sense that you'd actually take the time to stop and do that. Like, don't you just want to go, go, go? So that was my first time really observing it. And I don't think I understood it a little bit more until I retroactively looked back at it, after, meeting you and some of these others that kind of in our space that talk about this. And it's really just made a big difference. In fact, I've realized that training volume can kind of come down. It doesn't need to be nearly as much as I thought it needed to be. Especially if you're preserving for performance. So there's kind of a fine line, or rather a bold line, I guess, between training for body composition or hypertrophy or this, and training just for performance. It's like all you have to do is dip your toe in the water for performance to kind of keep it up and really optimize the rest and recovery more than anything.
Yeah. And so that's really interesting. So you saw these guys taking like the time in between like these massive anaerobic sets and even like flopping to the ground at certain points. Interesting.
Totally. It would be something like, or they'd, I remember seeing a meme a while back where it was like, I don't know if it was Brian McKenzie that posted it or something. It was someone kind of in the breathwork world. And it was saying like, when you're a kid, your coach used to tell you to rest like this, like you put your hands on your head and rest and breathe. And the actual way to do it is more so like, you can't really see my whole body, but you're kind of like resting with your hands on your knees because you're opening up so that you can get that full diaphragmatic breath. You're kind of restricted like this.
Right.
So you'd see a lot of the CrossFit athletes do that, right? And you see that in professional sports too. And it's something that isn't taught. I mean, I think from the breathwork perspective, you're seeing some of the NFL teams bringing in breathwork coaches and stuff now, which is great, like on the sidelines, which is really cool. So we're seeing that. But it's something that wasn't taught at all. And these guys naturally do it. They know how to regulate. They know how to put themselves in a literal physical position that's going to optimize parasympathetic tone.
Yeah. And so let's talk about some of the things that we can do sort of pre-workout, because if you can downregulate your sympathetic tone before workouts, this could be potentially very, very powerful. And a good example of this that I could think about is I was talking to an Olympic athlete that when he first started skiing down mountains, he used to listen to Metallica and like wanted to get really pumped up. But by the time he got to the highest levels of being an Olympic athlete, he was listening to Mozart and Beethoven. And so what have you found to be helpful in this capacity in the respect of trying to downregulate your nervous system before getting like too amped up? And that could potentially even be a detriment to some of your workout, right?
Well, I think the music thing is a very big piece because there's a lot of people that talk, but that's sort of an intro workout thing. So, put a pin in that. We'll come back to it when we talk intro workout, but pre-workout, one of the hardest things that I think any athlete-minded person, myself included, can do is dedicate 5 or 10 minutes to, doing some sort of parasympathetic activation, whether it's breath work, whether it's even some mobility movement or something prior. Because most of us are on a time crunch. I mean, you and I both have young kids, and, it's like all the feelings that kind of wash over you when you go into the gym. And especially for me, I train in the morning. It's really hard to get it out of my mind that, I'm being demanded at home. I got to get home and I got to get through my workout quick, or I've got an hour to do this. The last thing you consciously want to do is take 5 or 10 minutes out of that 1 hour to prep yourself for your workout. So it's a really difficult thing. But I almost can guarantee that when someone takes the 5 minutes to really set the tone prior to the workout, it makes a significant difference in your actual workout, even if the volume ends up being less. But I would argue that you're going to end up with just the same amount of volume, if not more, by setting the tone. And that kind of comes back to the music thing. It's like I was the same way. I would, on the way to the gym, I'd listen to, death metal or something to just kind of get me amped up. And that was just sort of like, that's no different than loading up on a bunch of caffeine. I mean, you're going to build up a tolerance to it. There is a dopamine hit that you're getting from that, and you are elevating your dopamine baseline. So then you just need more and more. So then it was like, okay, then I needed coffee plus death metal. Okay, then I needed coffee, nicotine, and death metal. Then I needed coffee, nicotine, death metal, and maybe half an energy drink or something. It was like, okay, you see the pattern here. So how do I reverse that and lower my baseline? So for me, I usually listen to like jungle tripper music or something when I'm working out. I kind of like it, but it sets the tone. And then it's funny because if you look at the intensity that I'm training subjectively is significantly less, even if the heart rate is, close to the same as it would be if it's like sometimes having that intense music is artificially stimulating this periphery that's not actually getting to the core of what you're trying to train.
Got it. Yeah. And so I love the change in music and the jungle. Actually, I worked with back in college. You don't know this, but I was in a band, and my drummer was a jungle drummer. And it was the best music ever to jam to because it had such this groove to it, right? It's not overstimulating. It's not understimulating. It's sort of just in that middle ground. And so we would do jam rock music to jungle. I love it.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's been my jam for a while, but then I just really rediscovered it for working out. It's like finding that. Well, I think there's something there too, because even the kind of metal I used to listen to would be like this metal that would have a groove, like this certain, like not hair metal type music, but the ones that had kind of a deep undulating kind of where you can just get into this rhythm. And I think there's something there. I think that your body kind of pulses to that, and you pull that. It probably even has an effect on heart rate.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. One thing I was thinking is that if you can like pre-workout parasympathetic activate, right, you're probably going to be able to increase your sympathetic reserve in the sense that like if you're coming from a lower baseline, you can probably increase the amount of weight that you actually can lift because you have like a larger sort of delta from being like, if you're too sympathetically active already, right, you have less potential power and sort of delta from where you're starting, right?
That's definitely true. And I think your risk of injury is probably going down as well because you have these periods of time in between your sets where, let's say you're, just for visual purposes of people that are, watching this rather than listening, let's say you're up here and this is, during your working set, if you're coming down just to here before your next set, you're only getting to capitalize on a small amount of that, parasympathetic tone, right? Before you're coming right back here. And then consequently, you're going to need longer rest between your sets. And after that, you're going to end up having less sets in a total workout, right? And that's just a very simple way of putting it. But if your baseline is a little bit lower already, then you allow yourself to have these peaks and troughs that you sort of want. And I think it's like the Orange Theory culture and a lot of the high intensity interval training type culture that really leads us to believe that, you shouldn't be dipping back into this low heart rate zone. You want to keep it elevated all the time. And I mean, the literature is pretty clear that you only really get a cardiac benefit from that. And even then, it's not that much. Like you're not getting the true metabolic benefit that you're after if you're just zone 3, 4, 5 all the time and never coming back into that. So the lower your baseline, better your parasympathetic tone before going into the workout, the more likely you are to tap into that. But in addition to that, it's the injury piece, right? Like
yeah, totally.
This whole,
yeah.
I don't have the studies offhand, but I mean, they're very, very prevalent. I know even some of the most evidence-based fitness people out there, I say that just people that only live by like what is published in a paper, no anecdote whatsoever. Even some of the most staunch evidence-based people will tell you that there is a very, very clear correlation between sympathetic tone and like lower back injury, right? It's the quintessential, I'm stressed out, I threw out my back, right?
Right.
Okay, well, you may not be quote unquote stressed out in the sense that you're having relationship trouble or you're stressed out from work, but you're still in that fight or flight. And it's still, the body doesn't know any different really. So you're getting this workout, you're already in a stressed position, like you're going to be vulnerable. And then the lines get blurred because you're already vulnerable and stressed out going into your workout. So you might as well just add more stress in your workout because the lines are blurred, but you're not able to actually listen to your body because you've just got this static of sympathetic buzz going the whole time, if that makes sense.
Right. Totally. Yeah, it does. And then at the same time, when you're sympathetically overdriving, you're also causing vasoconstriction, right? And so as a result of the vasoconstriction, you're going to get less nutrient and oxygen delivery to tissue too. So that probably just compounds the issue, I would imagine. Part of the interruption, this episode is brought to you by Transcriptions, makers of precision-dosed, physician-formulated, and pharmaceutical-grade formulas in the form of a buccal troche. For this episode, check out our TroCalm. Thomas talks about how he uses TroCalm to relax before pool workouts when he's holding his breath for long periods of time with Laird Hamilton and others, and those are crazy. I've seen those workouts, and I'm supposed to go to one this summer. Let's see if I can do it. But if I do, I'll take some TroCalm with me. TroCalm contains CBD, CBG, kava, and something called nicotinol GABA, all working on the GABA system to downregulate your nervous system, to calm you down so that you can relax and you can focus at the same time. Check it out at transcriptions.com and use code POD10 to save 10% on this order or any order on the Transcription store. Now back to the show.
Oh, for sure. And what do a lot of us do when we work out too? We kind of do the opposite thing of probably what we should. Just like we'll check our phones in between sets, right? And we'll open our email and we'll get an email in the middle of a set or in the middle of your rest period, and you just don't even realize what that is doing, right? Like you're taking this finite amount of time that you have to recover, and you're spiking it with something that's emotionally stressing you, or so it's all these different things, and then you're getting a massive like hit of maybe cerebral blood flow versus where you really wanted at that point in time, and it's a recipe for either injury or at least, at the very least, a crappy workout.
Yeah. Well, how do you think about like lactate in this case, right? Like if you're able to get more parasympathetic, how is that going to affect like your lactate clearance overall compared to if you weren't during a workout?
I think from the vasoconstriction side of things, that's definitely going to affect it, right? I mean, that's a pure one. You have to kind of, lactate clearance, lactic acid being the disassociated form of it. Essentially, it's really just hydrogen ions, right? So it's like when you lift, you're creating this influx of hydrogen ions, and the body has to buffer that. And for one, all that buffering is going to end up taking a back seat if there's something that's a higher priority, right? If there's something so it's sort of like if you're stressed out and you're running from a tiger, you might be able to run from a tiger for a short amount of time, but it's not something that's really kicking you into this endurance overdrive where you're going to run for a long time. It's a really quick shot in the arm. So you start to kind of lose that lactate clearance effect. You start to diminish that. And I think we're seeing with, I can't remember the sprinter's name. I can put it in the show notes. I can look it up later. I can't remember his name. Okay. But he's this either Norwegian or Swedish sprinter. And they've been, you can stop me if you've heard this, but it's still really cool. The guy.
Yeah, please go. Yeah.
He has been setting like 4x4 records nonstop. The guy's crazy. And his training is so different where they will have him run his 400 or an 800, and they will actually pull, a lactate reading, and they will have him go until his lactate reaches almost that threshold point, and then they just call it quits for the day, right? So they're actually using lactate as a way to guesstimate like when he should stop his training based on his ability to clear it. So I don't know if we have solid evidence to say like, hey, when you're stressed or not stressed, this is how much it's affecting it, but we have very clear anecdotal and very clear observational at this point that like when you're overtrained, i.e. in that fight or flight mode, you're not clearing lactate. And lactate clearance isn't like, hey, you're flushing lactate out. I mean, that's part of it. But lactate clearance is actually more about lactate coming back in through the pyruvic acid cycle and getting converted back into a usable source of energy. People think, clearing lactate's getting rid of the burn.
No,
not really. The burn is just the hydrogen. If you buffer the hydrogen one way or another, the fatigue is going to dissipate. But your ability to take that lactate and turn it into something that's literally a usable, it's like a perpetual motion device. It's freaking cool, right? It's like we take this byproduct and like, it's still somewhat of a mystery in many ways. Like we take a byproduct and we reconvert it into fuel. That's why when I look at that, I'm just like, to think that calories in, calories out is the end all be all is insanity to me. When you say we can take this molecule and we can, turn it into literal energy. Point is that we know that diminishes. So like the mechanism, I'd have to really dig deep. I don't know if we know the mechanism, but it's clearly there. So the long and the short of it is this runner is like, he's setting records left and right, and his training volume is ridiculously low. And
it's amazing.
And some days he'll do 1/400 and they'll be like, no, you're not clearing, you're out.
It's amazing they can just use this one marker, but it's a very powerful marker, as you said. And I agree with you. Like there used to be the thought that lactate was this waste product, this byproduct of metabolism, of energy production, of anaerobic respiration. But now we know that it's a fantastic way to recycle and make more energy overall. And so you've seen this probably real time in your own training over the years, I would imagine.
For sure. And it's, I think some of the most fascinating stuff with lactate is its purpose as a signaling device, right? So I think we're getting there. I think within the next couple of years, we're going to have continuous blood lactate monitors, which will be,
I've seen those.
I'll be the first in line for that. Like that's so cool. And because I think there's a lot of things that can tell us just about our stress state in general, like independent of workouts. But as a signaling device, in essence, you can draw a pretty clear line with your hydrogen ion buildup and your lactate, even though they're not one and the same. You can draw a pretty clear line with it because obviously it's a dissociated form. But what that tells us is that when you start building lactate or you get that burn, it's essentially a rite of passage for your body to start triggering a cascade of different things to induce muscle growth, induce recovery, even mitochondrial efficiency to a certain degree, actually to a large degree. So it's operating as a signaling device. It's actually communicating with the brain. And, we've seen it in a lot of different studies that you've probably seen, even like with ketogenic diets, when lactate levels are higher, how it can influence the brain. There's even been trials with using pure lactate for TBIs. And so lactate is definitely more than just this energy source and muscular kind of expenditure thing. It's literally communicating to the brain, being like, hey, this dude did work, trigger this cascade of whatever we need to recover.
Yeah. And we know the brain, one of the main fuels for the brain is actually lactate as well. And it can use it as a primary fuel if needed. So yeah, it's very cool. When it comes down to things, so what I'm going to do is going to ask you about like the post-workout parasympathetic activation side of things. And then what I'd like to do is talk about some actual strategies overall that I know you're using and that we're going to be talking about as well. So the things what do you think the benefits are from like getting down regulated on your nervous system, like as soon as you can, like after you finish with a workout? Like what have you found to be so helpful? And like, what have you noticed from like a recovery perspective, soreness perspective, overall being ready for the next workout, if you can get yourself parasympathetic sort of after the workout as soon as possible?
Yeah, I'll start off by saying I think getting parasympathetic after the workout is the most achievable for people and probably the most important for most people, right? Getting parasympathetic pre-workout is probably very important for like an athlete or someone that is experienced. I think for someone that is a beginner, that could be a tough one to even articulate, because maybe they're not the type of person that goes into the gym like raring to go anyway. Like maybe they're, so
yeah, true.
That's not
forcing themselves to the gym kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like, well, maybe there's sympathetic tone just from the stress of going to the gym because they don't want to go, right? But it's
right.
But I'd say post is the most directly pragmatic for most of the population and the wide variety of people. And I can't really think of a situation where you would want to be sympathetic post-workout. It just seems counterintuitive unless you really are trying to train for something specific with that. It's why I've never felt that there is a point in cold plunging right after a workout anyway. I know that obviously we have the studies now that say it blunts hypertrophy, and there's things that, even though they're not the strongest anyway, but it's just never made much sense to me. It's like, why would you want to add a stressor at the end of an already stressful, like just push it a little harder in your workout, or don't add this artificial stressor, wait a little while and use it as a recovery agent rather than just like tacking and stacking these stressors.
Right.
So I do firmly believe that getting yourself into that recovery state as fast as possible is how you can get into the anabolic mode as fast as possible, how you can get into recovery mode as fast as possible, and how you can signal to the brain, most importantly, that you're safe, right? Because if we just go intuitively, and we even go just, I don't know, from possibly a very logical perspective, if you're stressed out from your training and you recover quickly, your body's going to signal that the threat is done, right? The threat is done, and now we can just grow and adapt. Right. If you're not allowing yourself to recover and you're continuing to be stressed, you're rolling right into stressful work, or you're doing, then what is the brain supposed to do? It's going to continue to think that you're threatened, right? So it's going to dump all its resources that it can. You're going to pull from, everyday life. You're going to pull from the energy you can give your family, that you can give yourself. And it's truly is a stacking disaster eventually. So being able to get yourself into that parasympathetic state, I firmly believe can kind of signal this entire cascade to just happen faster. The delayed onset muscle soreness for me, anecdotally, I've noticed it comes on faster and goes away quicker. Whereas the, again, kind of standard 48-hour delayed onset muscle soreness that most people get, where it kind of builds. We've all had those situations. You do a hard leg workout, you feel fine throughout the day, and then it starts to creep in around 5, 6 p.m. and you're like, oh shit, this is not going to be good. And the next day you're sore and you're like, okay, maybe it's not too bad. And then the second day you can't sit on the toilet, and it's like terrible. But I've noticed that everything gets a little bit accelerated. It's like I can feel soreness kicking in a few hours after my workout, and then it's kind of gone by the end of the day. So everything's just expedited. And I believe that it's like because I'm allowing my body, probably has to do with blood flow. Delayed onset muscle soreness, go down that rabbit hole. That's in a lot of ways a mystery still. People don't know exactly what's causing the DOMS, but there's different theories. Point is it's accelerating it in one way. The other piece is, and this is speculative, is the entire like myokine piece, the myokine, potato, but that the exerkine, exerkine, myokines. Again, if you're stressed out, your body is going to secrete some of them, but you get a flood of them right afterwards. So if you can get yourself into that restful state, then you're going to get that cascade of these myokines that are going to preserve muscle throughout the course of the day. They can affect appetite. They're regulatory for the metabolic system. So a lot of different benefits that happen there.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because I love that you can have maybe this even very specific indication of how parasympathetic you got after the workout, depending on how fast your delayed onset muscle soreness actually happens. So you actually noticed like a direct correlation there.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and that's just me anecdotally. I can't say,
of course,
I'm pretty in tune with my body doing this for a long time. So I recognize these things because, I would find myself literally sandbagging my own workouts because I didn't want to be super sore 2 days later. But if I can predict it a little bit better, I mean, again, caveat being, soreness is a little bit of a mystery. Sometimes it can come on after 2 sets, and sometimes it won't come on until after, 20 sets. But I think your systemic recovery plays a role there too, which again comes right in line with what we're talking about, right? Your total CNS load, that entire equation.
Yeah. Do you think it's still pretty prevalent for people to believe that they're making the most muscle gains during exercise, or are more people more in the know that you make most of your gains after you exercise compared to when you're actually exercising?
I'd say in the fitness community, I think most people know that you're making the gains post, but even then it's hard to actually put into practice, because how could it not be? I mean, we're conditioned as humans, and that like hard work equals the result, right? That's like a pretty natural thing. And it's like this constant movement away from pain, and that's going to equal pleasure, and that's going to equal benefit and growth. And that's every like egoic principle you could think about is like, how do we move away from the pain and constantly adapt and shift adaptation there? So I think even as an experienced athlete, you find yourself being like, well, okay, if I work out harder, then I'm going to get a better result. And yes, I'm going to have to, so you can consciously wrap your head around it. Okay, I'm going to have to rest harder because this workout was harder. But it's really hard sometimes to be in a workout and say, this is enough. Like I'm listening. I'm truly listening to literally my body, not my ego. And I'm getting out of this. And that's fucking hard, right? Like
that's really hard. Yeah.
So yes, I think I'm very well aware of it, but am I guilty of, still pushing it those extra 20% in my workout that maybe I shouldn't have that day? Absolutely.
Yeah. It's really interesting. Well, I think what might be helpful is to talk about some practical ways to train like more smarter and less harder overall. And the idea here is to kind of give people some practical strategies, because you're right, it's not intuitive. It's not intuitive, especially pre and intra workout, to think about parasympathetic activation. But post workout, it's an easy way for people to get started overall. But anyway, I think it might be fun to talk about some strategies. One that I wanted to chat with you about that you and I have spoken about before, and our friend Brian McKenzie has spoken about before, is CO2 tolerance. So is there anything you want to add here as far as how you do this, or maybe some of your strategies, and maybe we can talk a little bit about what that is? Part of the interruption, this episode is brought to you by Health Optimization Medicine and Practice Association, a nonprofit organization training practitioners how to optimize health rather than treat disease. For this episode, check out our Health Optimization Medicine and Practice Symposium, happening October 17th and 18th in Boulder, Colorado. Go to homehope.org. Thomas is speaking, Thomas DeLauer, who is on this podcast with me today, along with Jill Carnahan, Elizabeth Yurth, Abid Hussein, myself, Dr. Scott Sherr, Dr. Ted Achacoso, and many others. Check it out at homehope.org. Find the symposium October 17th and 18th in Boulder, Colorado. We hope to see you there.
Yeah. And before we move into the CO2 tolerance, there's one other thing that I meant to say on the pre-workout piece that I should definitely note. I will alternate days, and this is, thanks to you guys, I will alternate days where I use caffeine versus nicotine. And I found that it's helped me not have to increase my caffeine dosage, because I would find these patterns, and I know a lot of people that do this. I think it's sort of like I mentioned earlier. I'm going to have a cup of green tea. Okay, well, I'm going to have a cup and a half of green tea. And then a week later, I'm having a cup of green tea and then maybe like a third of even an energy drink or something, just because I need that extra boost, right? And then it's a half an energy drink. And then it's, and then a month later, next thing I know, I'm drinking a full energy drink, right? And and that's when I'm like, wait a minute, no. Got to stop. And I reset, take a few days off or a week off. And then it's like a slow, 3-month process where your caffeine's building up again. And I found that just alternating, I'll still have green tea, but alternating a higher caffeine dose, and then another day do a little bit more like blue Canatine and have more like a nicotine hit. And even a small dose, right? We're talking less than a milligram for me. And that way I'm getting the focus. I might not be as amped up as I would be with caffeine, but I'm getting the focus. So I try to alternate that. And that prevents me from getting into this high cortisol, super sympathetic state that I'm going to get if I just load up on something. And I love caffeine. Don't get me wrong. I love messing around with all kinds of different stimulants and different things. I have fun with it, but caffeine just gets a little old, because after a while you're just freaking shaking and you're not really having fun. So I found that the nicotine makes it so that I can actually, we've all heard the saying slow is smooth, smooth is fast. That's what I feel like with low dose. And I'm talking, again, really low dose for me, less than a milligram. It's a smooth and fast feeling. I may not be jacked up like I would be if I had a pre-workout, but I feel focused and I feel calm and my heart rate's not going through the roof. So I think we're going to see a lot more research coming out there. And I'm happy to see that more people in the fitness community are recognizing that actually, and not bashing a low dose nicotine. So anyway, putting that aside.
That's a good question. Just a thing on that. So that's a balance, right? Because we're talking about nicotine and caffeine pre-workout as something that helps you focus, that gives you a little bit of a boost and a little bit of a sympathetic edge. But at the same time, you're trying to balance that between be not too overstimulated at the same time, right? So how do you kind of figure that out? What's your strategy there?
Yeah, I mean, that's largely based on feel for me. So if I can articulate it, caffeine feels scattered. It's the difference between the music we talked about. Caffeine feels like heavy metal, right? Whereas the nicotine or a blue Canatine sort of thing feels a little bit more like deep jungle rock or something, where you're just getting a groove, right? It's you can still go. If I had to really pinpoint it, I would say I'd probably elect for caffeine more on a day when I'm doing sub-maximal lift. I would go for blue Canatine on a day when I'm doing more of what I call a grind, a Metcon style, EMOM, every minute on the minute. I just got to go for 45 minutes and not lose focus. That's a good application. Whereas the nicotine would help in that too, for sure. But the nicotine is just, it's slow, it's steady, it's smooth, it's fast, and I can just kind of groove. Whereas the caffeine, I'm not going to lie. Probably the most studied ergogenic aid. It freaking works, but I just don't want to do it all the time.
Got it. Got it. Cool. Okay. So let's talk about CO2 tolerance a little bit and how you think about this sort of either before, during, or after workouts, and how it's potentially affected how you work out overall.
So I first got turned on to CO2 tolerance actually by Dr. Dom DeAgostino, right?
Yeah.
That was very interesting with him because we were talking about how ketones can actually augment CO2 tolerance, and which is pretty interesting. We were talking about in the relevance with high altitude training. I think I sent you that video. It totally flopped. It didn't go anywhere on YouTube because it's like such a niched audience. But sometimes I like to do those videos because it's like I'm personally interested in augmenting CO2 for high altitude work. And there's some military applications that are there too. So it's kind of cool. So I first got interested in that, and I was like, wait, my mind was blown. I'm like, you mean to tell me that my ability to hold my breath or withstand hypoxia has a huge part just to do with literally how my brain receives a signal from CO2 telling me that it's time to start gasping for air, and that I can override that. So then, turned into, Brian McKenzie's work and good friends with Laird Hamilton and kind of that world. So it got like opened up to that. And then there's the oxygen advantage guys, which, some of their stuff I buy into, some of it I don't. But the part that I think is very interesting is it's purely mechanistic stuff talking about augmenting CO2 tolerance. So for example, they'll do things like sprint uphill while holding their breath, right? And then they'll do things like put their body in a position where they can just get maximal amount of oxygen afterwards. So like run up a hill, like, it's kind of wild stuff. Or they'll like plug their nose so that it's just interesting stuff. Also mouth taping, all these kinds of things. But from a pure CO2 tolerance, one of the things that I don't do it intra workout because I prioritize my workout quality too much to do it intra workout.
Yeah,
but
sure.
Simply, have you ever heard of Fartlek training before? It's a funny name, but it's a Swedish term for speed work, right? So it's
a great name.
I know, it's weird. Fartlek, and it's I think it's speed play is what it translates to, and it's like where so it's all subjective sprinting. So you go out for a run, you do your speed work rather than saying I'm going to do 2 minutes of sprinting or 1 minute of sprint. It's like go telephone pole to telephone pole or telephone pole to 2 telephone poles, and it's very subjective. So you're gauging your RPE. You can do the same sort of thing with breath holds while you're walking. Okay, so what I'll do is like light posts or trees, or I'll say, okay, I'm walking. I'm going to take a couple deep diaphragmatic breaths, and I'm going to do an exhale, and I'm going to hold on the exhale until that light post. And what you do is, the first time you do it, you're going to get like 10 steps, and you just realize that when you're under load, you're like, holy crap.
It's much different.
It's not that you're building up so much CO2 because you're moving. It's because you're just in this different state where you're stressed out because you're moving, you need oxygen. Now, counter that with, say, breath work where you're lying on the ground, which is wonderful. I do it every day, but still, you're in a safe situation. You're safe. You're laying down. So your nervous system's saying, you're safe. You can hold your breath a lot longer. So yes, it's about the exertion, but it's more, in my opinion, about the safety thing. I think when you're moving, your body is telling you you're not quite as safe, you're more vulnerable, you're in need of oxygen. So if you hold your breath, it's going to tell your brain to force you to breathe sooner, which is a great way to gamify it and get yourself to that CO2 tolerant state faster, because not everyone has 15 minutes to lie down, make themselves, do holotropic breath work and get to a point where you're going to do these long holds. And even then, it begs the question, if you are conditioned, it's all relative, right? So like a good example is like, if you use something like even ketamine, where you are shutting down your default mode network, people will find, okay, they can hold their breath longer. I notice it significantly. So that really makes you wonder. You're like, well, when my brain is calm, how come I can hold my breath twice as long? Like, we're not talking a little bit, but twice as long. Telling me this isn't the need for oxygen. It's my brain not shutting the hell up, telling me I need to breathe. So when that, DMN is shut down and you all of a sudden you hold your breath, it puts things into perspective. So when you're doing breath work and you're doing holotropic breath work, you are shutting down your DMN eventually or quieting it. It's just taking you 15, 20 minutes to get there sometimes. And that's just, I love it, but I don't always have the time to do it. But my point in making it all relative is like, if you first flop down on the ground and you start doing breath work, your holds are not going to be very long. But that's the part, it doesn't matter because it's all relative. So you need to train that CO2 tolerance that when you get that stress, you're okay and you're safe. And that can happen the first time you lay on the ground, but it can happen even more accelerated if you do it like while you're walking, and
so you found that the fastest way is to do it with walking and holds and just take your time with it. And I think that's fantastic. But there's a lot of different ways. You talked about a couple. You talked about, the gear system that Brian McKenzie had, the oxygen inventions, the Buteyko method. There's multiple different methods, but I think in the end, with the physiology here, right, is that we're desensitizing essential and peripheral chemoreceptors in the brain, right, which actually is going to boost your vagal tone and make you feel safer overall. So you can withstand a higher CO2 level, knowing like exactly you just described, right? Your DMN, when it's shut down, for example, with ketamine, you can hold your breath for longer. It's because it's a thing where the body is reacting to something where it could just be a fear response because most people are over breathing anyway, right? That's kind of the idea here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very, very interesting. That was my first eye-opening experience with it. I mean, I'd done a lot of breath work. I've done the pool work with Laird Hamilton, which is awful but awesome at the same time.
Crazy.
And it's one of the things that he taught me that really, no pun intended, opened my eyes is he said, when you're down underwater, he noticed that I'm a pretty muscular dude, which means that like I'm going to soak up oxygen really quick, right? So like in theory, I wouldn't be able to hold my breath as long, but and in some ways it's true, but eventually you get past that, he was seeing me sort of like gassing out really quick underwater because I just couldn't calm down. And he's like, okay, when you're underwater, he's like, and you're holding your breath, he's like, pay attention to your periphery. He's like, you'll notice that you just start looking tunnel vision ahead. He said, open up your periphery and try to look out to the sides. And you get this wave of expansion, this expansiveness that just comes over you when all of a sudden you stop looking like this and you're underwater holding your breath with dumbbells and you just all of a sudden expand and look, and you're like, you feel everything come down and all of a sudden you've got another 30 seconds in you. And the saying that they always say, and this is metaphorical in some ways, is, there's air at the top. Don't worry. There's air at the top, and it's a safety thing. So, and then, flash forward to kind of the ketamine thing and you're just like, okay, well, that's not doing anything to my physical body as far as like my oxygen utilization, as far as I know. So it becomes very, very clear that you're just, it's all, for lack of a better term, it's all in the head, right?
Yeah.
So, but the CO2 thing, it's a little bit more than just all in the head. It's all in the nervous system too, right?
Yeah.
So,
and we know that people that are more stressed hyperventilate and they have a lower CO2 tolerance in general, and it becomes like a vicious cycle, right? Where people have a harder and harder time even tolerating any CO2 the more stressed that they are. And the interesting thing is like when you can actually train your CO2 tolerance, you're actually going to improve the amount of oxygenation that's going to get released into your tissues because of something called the Bohr effect, which I'm sure you're familiar with. This is just how much oxygen gets taken off your red blood cells depending on what your CO2 levels are in your body. So for example, if your CO2 levels are higher, you're going to drop more oxygen into your tissue versus if your CO2 levels are lower, you're going to hold on to more oxygen even if you have your red blood cells saturated with oxygen.
So does this happen at altitude? Is there an effect with it?
Yeah, there is. And so when there's less oxygen in the air, you have a dissociation of your oxygen dissociation curve is what it's called. There's certain things that will allow your O2 to unbind faster overall compared to binding tightly. And so if you're alkalotic, meaning that you're holding on to, you're breathing off a lot of CO2, you're going to hold on to more oxygen on your red blood cells and not let it come off into the tissue. But if you're acidotic, and which means that you're holding on to more CO2, or there's more CO2 compared to oxygen in the air relatively, you're going to actually unbind more oxygen from your red blood cells. So red blood cells carry, like hemoglobin carries 4 oxygen molecules. There's actually 250 million hemoglobin molecules per red blood cell. It's like 1 billion oxygen molecules per red blood cell. It's a lot. But the idea is that we don't typically unbind more than 2 from a hemoglobin. And it's actually very uncommon unless you have certain conditions where hypoxia is one of them, of course, and increased CO2 is another. So by allowing yourself higher CO2 levels with CO2 training, you're actually going to dump more oxygen into your tissue and have more oxygen utilization as a result of that.
So do you dump that oxygen is that a general thing, or do you dump the oxygen while the CO2 is high? So, and
you dump it while the CO2 is high. Yeah.
Okay. So that's why you get kind of high when you're on a breath hold on empty.
Exactly. Okay. So you get this high, especially, and they talk about doing the breath holds and then exercising afterwards, like you talked about. So you do like your breath hold and your CO2 rises, and then you do push-ups or something like that, right? That when you do the push-ups, all that oxygen that's in the system is going to get released more into the muscles as a result of that higher CO2 level in the system, that kind of thing.
Interesting. I did not know that's how it worked. That's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, but you're reducing, anxiety, you're rewiring your threat perception, you're improving breathing efficiency, all these things with CO2 tolerance. But it takes time, right? It's not something that people, and this is something that Brian told me a while ago that I thought was helpful. It's like you shouldn't be forcing it as much. It's more, training it over time, doing it slowly, because you want to sort of, slowly shift that curve and not try to bludgeon yourself, because you could, it's going to cause a fear response if you're not careful.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So another one that we want to talk about was just basically, posture, right? You talked about a little bit about this before with holding on your knees. What have you found to be like the biggest problems in the gym, like from people using posture as a way that's allowing them, more sympathetic drive and not letting them, down-regulate their nervous system either before or, especially during or even after doing a workout?
I'd say, this is going to sound like it's out of left field, but this like heavy anterior pelvic tilt, that's first of all, like something that I think once corrected kind of helps align some of this stuff. I learned this from a good friend of mine, Vinny, who's actually be a good guy for your show as well. But he's basically when you become like extremely shoulder driven, which happens with a lot of people in the gym, it was definitely a big problem for me. You get to this point where if your hips aren't underneath you, you're always in this like trapped position where you're not actually getting truly a full breath, and you feel like you are, but you're not, right? You're compacted. So I lead with that because that's a really common thing that you're going to see, especially with guys in the gym, like training a lot of chest, training these, like, first off, you got to unwind some of this, and you have to train in a way that's going to be conducive to making you more parasympathetic. Like if you're tight and your traps are tight and you're tight in the upper body all the time and you're restricted, you're probably not getting those breaths the way that you want to. And we've all kind of experienced where when you first start a workout, it's like breathing feels kind of forced and difficult, and it's actually those intercostals aren't working. And so there's like this physical element of just loosening that stuff up, right? So for me, like myofascial release, doing things like that. If you don't want to do breath work before you work out, at least do a little myofascial or foam rolling or something, not because it's amazing for mobility and whatnot, but because it's going to at least loosen that tissue up. So if I'm going to be doing anything that's going to require heavy ventilation, I will roll out my lats and I will roll out my intercostals. And it makes a significant difference in how I breathe. Because if you're restricted when you're in between your sets, you're going to find yourself doing all kinds of weird contorted things to try to get a breath. Like you just do. But if you can loosen that stuff up and actually like just get some blood in there, also hydration, being super hydrated, like so that those muscles and the fascia can move, because we're all just one giant meat suit. It's like covered in fascia, really. Like, I don't even know what's inside when you really get down to it.
I'm going to use that. We're a meat suit covered in fascia. I love it. It's perfect. Yeah.
You really want to get weird on it. You keep going inward. You're like, okay, well, what's inside our organs? And then what's inside that? And what's inside that? And it's kind of empty at the end of the day.
Indeed. 99% of it. Yeah, for sure.
So it's, sometimes that feels hopeless, but it's also kind of cool when you think of it like that. So anyway, so this meat suit that's wrapped in fascia, it's like, it's all one piece of fascia. And I know we're going a direction that maybe we weren't expecting, but like, we're all,
love it.
Yeah, it's basically one giant piece, right? So it's like when you loosen up fascia, even on your IT band, it can have an effect up here. So just take 5 minutes and do a little foam rolling, and use a roller that hurts. Like, don't do one like not like miserable, but use one that hurts, not some soft pansy foam roller that just feels comfortable. Like you gotta loosen that stuff up a little bit. But I think there's also a neurological thing that happens there. Like you're starting to communicate, you're kind of waking up in a way. But now to your actual question, like in terms of postures, one of my favorite ones is if I take a flat bench, I will put see if I can demonstrate this. I'll take my elbows up over the bench, but I'll do both elbows over a bench. And then I'll kind of come back down into a position where I'm almost doing a cat-cow position, if you know that position, but with my elbows up on a bench. So kind of getting the spine into a good extension and getting my C-spine into as much of an extension as I can, and then nasal breathe in that position. And that is sort of one of my SOS positions. Like I find that I can bring myself down really quick there. Now, if you're working out at, Gold's Gym in West Hollywood, or it's, you probably end up with a staph infection being on the floor, but
yeah,
it's, if you have the luxury of working out at home or something like it's a great SOS position. And again, another one from my friend Vinny, who's got a lot of these good ones, but one of his SOS positions is you take like 2 blocks, almost yoga blocks, and you just kind of get on face on the floor in this position. And with your toes sort of pointed out or straight out. So you're actually like, extension there. Okay. And you're just kind of laying in that position. Again, your face would be on the floor, so you don't want to do it in a public gym, but it's these SOS positions that you just kind of can lay in for 30 seconds or a minute, and just kind of, again, communicates to your body that you're safe. And just get yourself out of the mindset that you need to be turned on in between sets. So think of it as these big one. Macro scales and these micro scales, right? These different, we know that we shouldn't work out every single day. We know we need rest days. Okay, so we have no problem turning that off, but how come intra-workout we have this hard time really understanding, like, you should be on, you should be off? And literally, even in a given set, you could find a way to meditate into it, to actually find the stillness mid-set too, right? So now, granted, you want to keep tension on the proper muscles for stability, but you can find those moments of stillness, and usually are happening at the end of your breath, right? And then you find those. And I'm a firm believer, and there's no evidence to back this up from a literal mechanistic sense, but those little microseconds, nanoseconds of finding that parasympathetic activity, like here's a moment of calm and recognizing that, you can squeak another rep or two. You're not just like switched on in this like crazy go mode. So finding those little moments of stillness that are always there, and it's almost like meditating through your workout. It's a pretty fun thing once it clicks.
Yeah, you and I have spoken about meditation through workouts, and this is an interesting one. And you kind of just talked about it briefly there, but maybe talk about how you think about meditation during a workout. And this is not there's obviously different types of meditations and ways to think about this, but how do you think about meditation as an active way to relax, during workouts, or maybe the end of the set? Like, what are you thinking about, or what are you doing there as kind of an overall strategy?
My hallmark strategy is, and my phrase is, this is what's happening right now, or this is what it feels like right now. And that's just how it is. This is what it feels like right now, because every single one of us, when we are lifting, when we are working out, we are future tripping. We are, because we're in a little bit of pain. So we're future tripping, and we're thinking about that next second. We're even thinking about the next half second. We're thinking about the next 5 reps. If we're doing a set of 15, we are all counting to that set of 15, and we are going 9, and we're thinking in our head, we have 6 more, and it sucks. And so tactically, I stopped counting reps. I just go to failure. Like or my proximity to failure. I still count reps in some cases, but generally, like, how come nobody likes to do 13 reps of something? Like, they'll always have to go 15 or 12. Or like, what about 13? What about 17? Those are perfectly good numbers. And so a lot of times I'll end up there. But the only time I'll count is if I'm doing unilateral stuff and I want to keep it balanced. But even then, it's questionable, right? Like, I mean, you got to train the way you got to train. But if I'm in this immense amount of pain, there's like this kinesthetic awareness. I used to have this thing where it was the pain switch, and then that was like the wrong way of thinking for where I am in life now. It was a kinesthetic awareness where I could like see a visual red switch when I was in pain, and it was sort of David Gogginsy, which is not what I want to be like now. And now it's much more, this is what it feels like right now. And you can feel that burn, you can feel it. And it's amazing how much more you've got in you when you just do that. But you don't know how much you got, and you never will, because if you're really in that moment, you're probably not counting anyway. The point is, it's all relative, and it's just, the workout is going to get you the desired result much better. And then you're also having the secondary effect of getting this, meditative aspect too. And also, I mean, one of the things that you brought to my awareness, which was pretty cool, was remember that it's all happening right now. And like when you do that during a workout, it's really cool. So I was doing it this morning. I was doing front squats, and I was trying to, and I was just, there's a lot of, busyness coming into my mind at the moment. And if you submit to the fact that, like, hey, all of this is real and all of this is happening, but it's not, there's always going to be one thing that's standing out more that you're going to identify with. I'm anxious or I'm stressed. The reality is that's always happening all the time. And it goes back to our discussion we had a while back about the thalamic gate. And it's like, this is all happening. And when you realize that you almost give yourself a license to feel that, but you also give yourself a license to feel all the other stuff, it sounds woo-wooey, but man, is it freaking cool when you actually put it into performance application. So, and you just forget, time kind of stops and you just do your set, you feel the pain, you feel it, you're done when you're done. And that's that.
I love it because one thing I often like to remember is that nothing's happening in the future. Nothing's happening in the past. It's all happening right now. Even if you're thinking about the past or the future, it's all neural network depolarizations that are happening right at this very moment.
Yep.
But I think what you're really doing, if you wanted to kind of give it a name, Thomas, would be a focused practice awareness kind of meditation, right? Where you're focusing on the actual thing that you're doing right now. And by doing that, your motor control is going to be better. Your focus is obviously going to be better. Your control is going to be better. So your sets are going to look better. And I love that you're thinking about it as this is something that's very common, right? You work with a trainer and all of a sudden you can do 10 more reps than you would have been able to do on your own. It's the same kind of thing, right? Where your mind is sort of getting in the way. But if you just focus on that feeling at this very moment, it's transformative. And this is something that you've actually been very helpful with as well for me as my own practice. But I didn't think about it this exact way until you said it, because this is what you do, right? It's super cool overall to think about it in that capacity. And I think it'd be very helpful for those that are listening that it's not like we're trying to, make you like meditate and have no thoughts. That's not the idea. The idea is just to focus on what's happening now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know that I'm a big fan of Adyashanti, if anyone knows who he is, but he's, and he's like, his words always ring through my head when I'm training. I'm not a meditator. Like, I don't want to be the meditator. Like, life is meditating through me, right? So like when I'm working out, that's how I feel. It's meditation for gain or for betterment is like a tactic and a tool. That's not necessarily what I'm after. I'm
right.
I guess in a way I am, but it's just, I'm also just trying to be. So it's like when that happens, it's like feeling the energy move through me. So it's not like, okay, I have to do this meditation thing while I'm working out. No, you're actually just working out, but you're working out to truly work out. The meditative aspect is just vocabulary you put on what you really should be probably doing anyway.
Right. It's the lack of suffering, right? The idea is that you don't have to suffer even if pain is ongoing, right? Pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. When you're more mindful of these things, it becomes more of the situation becomes the ecosystem and it's all good. But wanted to also ask you, I know we're kind of getting to the end here, a little bit about nutrition and carbohydrates. And so how do you think about carbohydrates within or pre, post, intra workout? Like what is your typical recommendation here? How does it change for you depending on what you're going to do?
Yeah, definitely. My relationship with carbohydrates is confusing for most people, and rightfully so, because I would still consider myself a relatively, if not, I'm definitely a low carb guy, but I treat carbs as a supplement rather than like an imperative fuel source. And that's where, I differ from a lot of athletes, and I'm definitely not saying that carbohydrates are bad for athletes at all. In fact, I think it's probably the people that are in the top 1% are probably using copious amounts of carbohydrates. So clearly it works. But for me, I am much more of a fan of keeping it lower carbohydrate and then using carbs as sort of an exogenous supplement when I need them, because the body doesn't need them to survive. But when there's heightened brain demand, things like that, it does kind of make some sense in ways. But from a parasympathetic perspective, carbohydrates are definitely something that puts you into that calm state, right? Now, when you look at it from a cortisol perspective, one of the only things that we can see in scientific literature that truly blunts cortisol is insulin, right? So, and there are unique situations where insulin and cortisol kind of coexist, but they're usually very like adipose hypertrophic states. Like those are the kind of states you don't want to be in, right? Where you're really gaining fat. But carbohydrates can be used to bring yourself to a calmer state, right? So we've all kind of heard, maybe we all haven't heard it, but a lot of us have heard about having carbohydrates at night to help induce sleep, right? So that is simply the carbohydrates, like the large neutral amino acids, not having to compete anymore. So you're getting more of these carbohydrates into the actual brain and the tryptophan into the brain, ultimately converting into serotonin to melatonin. But still, there's a calming effect that happens pretty instantly. Also, people don't understand always that insulin binds to these different, orexigenic neurons in the brain that actually turn them off. And it can actually, so it basically can reduce all this like excitatory, stimulatory activity in your brain. So sometimes the strategic use of carbohydrates pre or intra workout can actually help calm you down. And that's how I use them, which is so opposite from what I think a lot of people use them for. Like, oh, I get my carbs, I want to get amped up. Unfortunately, the scientific literature is very clear. They did this with unflavored maltodextrin, and they did this where they had and water. They basically told people they were giving them carbohydrates and didn't, and they performed the same as the group that did have the carbohydrates, that they told they had the carbohydrates. So in essence, carbohydrates, and Dr. Tim Noakes did a lot of this stuff. It's like, it really is a psychological aid in a lot of cases because we see carbs as energy. So you don't need them. But the part that is true and is documented is how it kind of shifts your state. So intra-workout carbohydrates, like maybe some watermelon juice is like one of my favorites if I'm going to do it. Multiple reasons why I like watermelon juice. One, it's a nice ratio of glucose fructose. So you're not getting a heavy insulin spike in itself. Also, you're getting pretty good vasodilation because of the citrulline in it. It's also one of the best sort of minerally balanced fruit juices that you could have. So you're getting a good, nice kind of mix there. But the reason that you have an intra-workout is there's this thing called the insulin-independent glucose uptake. So insulin can help you out from a parasympathetic state, but also just having some glucose on board can help you out from a parasympathetic state. So when you're actually moving your muscles and you're contracting your muscles themselves, you can take up glucose still through what's called GLUT4 translocation, through the primary means in which you draw glucose in, but it's happening independent of insulin. So this is really cool for people that are dealing with metabolic dysfunction or are insulin resistant, because you can actually start, this is getting off a little tangential for a second, but you can condition your body to be able to utilize carbs at a cellular level without dealing with insulin. So it's a great way to sort of introduce carbs in. So people that are insulin resistant will say, if you want to have your cake and eat it too, like, bring your cake to the gym. Like that's like, not that you really want to do cake. So that's what makes it fascinating, but also just immediately post-workout, right? So that's going to put you into that sympathetic or parasympathetic state a little quicker, help you calm down. You just have to look at it, what works for you, because if you're overweight, you're trying to lose fat, there is really strong evidence that like waiting a little while after your workout before you eat is going to be more advantageous for body composition. So you kind of have to balance it, right? So I would say if you're overweight, carbohydrates with your last meal of the day make the most sense. It's going to help you get your sleep, which is going to help you be more parasympathetic anyway. If you're already lean and you're an athlete, I encourage you to maybe just have like a small bolus of carbohydrates immediately post-workout. Don't even worry about having the protein just yet. Just get a little, 20 grams of carbs coming from like either like a cyclic dextrin or a watermelon juice or something, and then kind of get yourself into that recovery state. In fact, Dr. Mike Israetel and I talked about this too. And he's, most people know him as, he's probably one of the leading hypertrophy channels, at least on YouTube. And he admittedly will say like carbohydrates don't necessarily influence muscle growth too much, except for the fact that they calm you down. And they're not going to, insulin's not going to be like in that way a huge player for hypertrophy. It can be, but the carbohydrates in the totem pole of muscle growth are at the bottom, absolutely at the bottom in terms of like stimulus first, protein next, then you have calories, then you have carbs. So negligible impact. But from a parasympathetic side of things, very powerful.
Right. That's good to kind of get an order of operations there specifically. But from a parasympathetic activation, the carbs are great, especially at night, to help people sleep. So that's what you'd recommend for most people overall, as opposed to working out and then having carbs right after if you already have a little bit of weight to lose, for example.
Yeah, I think it's, you have to do a cost benefit analysis on that, right? Like,
makes sense. Yeah. There's other ways to downregulate your parasympathetic nervous system too, as we discussed overall here, many different ways. Maybe to finish up, we can talk a little bit about supplementation. If there's anything specifically that you use either pre, post, intra-workout that you think is helpful from the parasympathetic side. I mean, there's many things like, of course, protein that's going to help with anabolic aspects of muscle building. We know that the protein timing doesn't matter as much as we used to think, but is there anything from a parasympathetic perspective that you found can be helpful for you?
Yeah. I mean, I've had one that's like very easy to tell is when I did do the pool work with Laird versus when I did another round and I did the pool work out in, when I say pool work, you're basically at the bottom of a pool with dumbbells, like drowning yourself. And I've done it with some of the soft guys out in Fort Bragg. I guess it's Fort Liberty now, out in North Carolina. And a couple different situations where I actually tried using like a half a trochee of Trocalm before doing pool work. And it was a different ballgame. It really was. And that's purely anecdotal. And who knows, I can always placebo myself, but that was pretty significant. Like, I don't know if I would do that on like a heavy resistance training day. Maybe I would, Sure. I don't know. But for that, I mean, that was clearly, I was more parasympathetic, right? My breath holds were significantly better. I wasn't panicking underwater. And it was like go time. I could feel that, definitely. For like regular workouts, like I mentioned, the blue cannatine is a big one for me. I'll usually do a low dose creatine. And that's more for the nootropic effect more than anything, quite frankly. I'm really sensitive to creatine from a water retention perspective. And I battle my own demons with body composition stuff. So maybe I'll just get over it. But when I have, 5+ grams of creatine, I tend to hold water. So a lot of times, like first thing in the morning, I'll just have like 2 grams, which kind of, again, the literature is pretty strong. There's a pretty immediate effect, especially if you're sleep deprived. So that's kind of a part of like the pre-workout stack for me. Caffeine of some kind, which is usually negligible amounts on the for the most part. I'll usually try to keep it like under 75 milligrams, usually just like a green tea type thing. Yeah. Methylene blue, usually 3 days a week, and I don't particularly use it any specific day. I just take it 3 times a week. I just space out my doses. I'm already lean. I'm already metabolically healthy. Yeah. I don't feel like I need it every day. But it does boost my mood a little bit, which probably has an influence on parasympathetic tone, during a workout. Yeah. And then of course some intra workout carbs. So like what I'll do is I do half of my workouts, probably more like 2/3 of my workouts fasted. And then I purposely do a couple workouts a week fueled, usually with just something like a cyclic dextrin, which is just a form of carbohydrate that has quick gastric absorption, but is low glycemic. And I do that literally just because it's hard for me to do. It's hard for me to work out with carbs on board, which tells me that I'm probably glucose intolerant to a certain degree because I've become peripherally insulin resistant by training fasted so much. So I almost want to condition my cells to get better at it. But I also notice, unfortunately, for sort of my dogma, I'm stronger and more calm when I have some carbs pre-workout. So I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Always a balance here. I get it. Well, this has been great, man. I mean, we could talk about so many things for such a long time, but Thomas, at the end of the podcast, I always ask everybody that's on here, and we've talked about a lot of this already, like 3 ways everybody can live smarter, not harder. That's the name of the podcast too. Do you have some simple tips, from the things we talked about today or other things that it doesn't have to be, about workouts at all, in life, in family, that you think that everybody can do that can help them live smarter, not harder?
I'd say the first one is just stop and feel your feet on the ground. That's something that's just always a game changer for me. Always works every single time. If I just stop, feel my feet on the ground. So whenever you're stressed, whenever you're not stressed, just stop and just come into your body for a second. Okay, for people that are fitness minded, things like that, that's just always that kinesthetic kind of feel that you need. I would say, think of a couple of good ones here. Well, it's a little cheeky given everything we've talked about, but breathe, right? Just breathe. And if, you're ever in a pinch, if you're even workouts, right? Just a simple box breath, going back to, something like that, right? Mm-hmm. And then the last one is don't be afraid to use a crutch. We have this mindset in our society that like a crutch is cheating or a crutch is going to always be addicting. And like, it's sort of like the use of even like psychedelics, right? Like they can be a crutch, right? It's like these things are, but that's okay. Like a crutch is okay, especially if you're seeing it as a crutch and you're not making it your reality all the time, right? So, and the same concept even with methylene blue, it's like, okay, for metabolic dysfunction, like it might be a crutch, but why is that a problem? Like why do we have to do everything? Like I always joke about like, I didn't get to like my biomechanical ailments naturally. What I mean by that is squatting 405 and doing these things. That's not a natural thing. I've damaged my body in unnatural ways, and I might need unnatural help to get me back. I can't expect to just wear barefoot shoes and do yoga and correct everything that I've done with thousands of pounds on my body, right? So I just encourage people to change the mindset surrounding temporary uses of a crutch, because that's exactly what they are. They're not forever. They're not, they literally can be a crutch. And it's a little bit of a liberating thought when you put it like that.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about it, right? You can just, let it. It's part of your flow, part of your journey in that case. I love it. Well, Thomas, this has been awesome, man. I want to just do a quick minute to introduce you as a speaker at our Health Optimization Medicine and Practice Symposium in October 17th and 18th in Boulder, Colorado. I'm really looking forward to having you be a speaker, man. Are you excited to come?
Yeah, I'm stoked, man. Always awesome to go to Boulder, and happy to be a part of it. It's gonna be sweet.
Awesome. And where can people find out more about you, Thomas, and your work? If they're looking for you, I know it's pretty easy, but you can give them some handles and things.
I usually joke how do they get away from me? But yeah, just thomasdelauer.com, or just on YouTube or Instagram, just at Thomas DeLauer.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you, sir, for your time. And I'll see you soon in Vegas and other locations. And always good to have you. And thanks for being here.
For sure, man. Thanks, bud.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Smarter Not Harder podcast, where we give you 1 cent solutions to $64,000 questions. This was a fantastic podcast with Thomas to record. We talked about parasympathetic activation. We talked about performance, anabolic strength and conditioning, and how you can really do this using very practical tools and tips: breath work, posture, supplementation, meditation, carbs, and so much more. If you like this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe below, and check out our Home Hope Symposium at homehope.org. Thomas will be speaking there October 17th and 18th in Boulder, Colorado. 2 days of amazing speakers. Come check it out. We hope to see you there. Take care.